Okay, so I tried to video this yesterday, and I felt like it was really all over the place because I was working with my notes, and I really should never work with my notes on this, so that it's a lot clearer. I'm going to explain how to make a 10-stitch cardigan, and this is the written pattern. I'm not going to go in and show exactly how to start doing a 10-stitch blanket. There's tons of 10-stitch blanket videos out there. Just find the designer that does the best video for you on YouTube. I can send you to links that I do 10-stitch star, which is the same techniques, but it's not the 10-stitch blanket. So you'll want to find you a 10-stitch blanket written or designer who explains the 10-stitch, but this is kind of going off of it, and I'm going to explain how to make a cardigan out of a 10-stitch blanket. So there's some items you'll need. You need to figure out which gauge yarn you're gonna, which gauge loom you're going to use, and what size yarn you're going to use for that. It needs to be an equivalent. Now, to make this, you're probably going to need anywhere from 2 to 3 skeins. When I made the baby, and this could be a baby jacket, literally. When I made this, I only used 1 skein, but this is for a doll, and I only used 6 stitches rather than 10. But that'll be explained in the sleeves. So you'll need an adjustable loom so that you can adjust for how big your sleeves are. So Flexi, X loom, any adjustable loom. You really don't even need those fancier looms for this. Okay, so here's how we're gonna go. You only need stitch markers and buttons, so you shouldn't need much in supplies. Okay, so formula. There's things you'll need. You'll need to do a swatch of 10 stitches by 15 rows. And this will give you an idea. And your swatch is going to be based off your inches. So, however many inches the 10 stitches use, that's what you're going to be basing your stitches per inch off of. And I'll explain that. Okay, so your stitches per inch of the 10 stitches. So if your 10 stitches makes 3 inches, that's what you're going to be basing it off of, 3 inches. Alright, and it'll make sense when we go to do this. Okay, so your rows per inch you'll need, and that's what this is going to tell you. And it doesn't have to be done anything special, you just count it out. Okay, and then you need your chest or hip circumference, whichever's wider. A lot of times for women, the hips are wider, so you probably end up using your hip circumference, but whatever's widest, use it. Some may have a chest that has a wider measurement, but whichever is widest, chest or hips, use that measurement. And I'm going to calculate it as CC. That's its initials. Now, you're going to need a measurement from the shoulder to the waist length, and that's going to be represented as STW. Then you need your arm circumference, which is the biggest part of your arm and what it is around, and you'll need your arm length. Alright, those are the measurements you're going to need. Now, you're going to take your hip measurement or your chest measurement, and you're going to divide that by 2, and that's going to get your back. But it will get your front, but I call it back just because that's where you're starting. Now you're going to go and you're going to take your stitches per inch, which is what this is going to represent, your stitches per inch. And you're going to times that by 2. Okay, so if it's 3 inches that takes up that, then you're going to times that by 2, which I think for my example is like 6. Okay, so then you're going to take your shoulder to waist length and you're going to minus this number here. Alright, and it'll give you your inches that you're going to use to start. And this will make sense, okay, because you have to cast on and then you have to do so many rows before you do your corner. Alright, and it's those so many rows before your corner that really gets you started with a 10 stitch. Alright, so that's what we're trying to figure out, is where to go with the 10 stitch first. Alright, so the inches you use to start. So you take the inches you use to start and you multiply your rows per inch. And that's the number of rows you're going to start with. Okay, now you're going to go and take your back number, which is up here, and you're going to divide that to the number to minus, which is this here. And that'll give you your number of rounds. So it should be like, 1, 2, 3 rounds depending on your measurement. Okay. So then you're going to take and you're going to take that, and that's what you're going to base your thing off of. But now you got to figure out your armholes, right? So you're going to do like the hover number of rounds, and then you got to figure out your armholes, and I'll explain that. But you got to figure it out first. So you're going to take your arm circumference, and you're going to divide that by 2, which is half arm measurement. Half arm measurement times your rows per inch equals the number of rows. The number of rows divided by 2 equals number of slips to skip on the edge. So what you're going to do is you've done all this to figure out how many number of slips, which are your little chains on the side, you're going to need to skip. I'll explain this. So these little things, you're going to count them out, however many you need to skip. Where you don't attach, because you're used to attaching, so you need to figure out a section where you're not going to be attaching for so many, and it's going to be working from an end. Okay, and I'll explain that. Alright, so the number of slips to skip on the edge, and then you're going to mark it. Okay, but you're going to need these number of rows to actually do when you're not connecting. You're going to be slipping on the ends. Alright, so then you have your arm length, and this one you'll need later to start figuring out how to do the sleeves. And your arm length is going to be multiplied by your rows per inch, which is your total rows for sleeves. Leave approximately 8 to 10 rows at the end to just work the sleeve with a garter stitch. Now, you need to know the number of rows times 2 equals the number of pegs needed for the sleeves. So, number of rows up here, half measurement times rows per inch, or number of rows. You're going to take this and you're going to times that by 2, and that's going to be the number of pegs you're going to need for a sleeve. Okay. Basically, your however many slips there are times 2. So I actually need to change that. So the number of rows equals the number of pegs you're going to need for your sleeves. I'm going to change that real quick. So number of rows up here, number of rows equals the number of pegs needed for the sleeves when you go to do it. Okay. Alright, so you need an example so you have an idea of what we're doing. So I'm going to use a 5/8 inch gauge loom. My swatch ended up being approximately 3 inches for 10 stitches. This will represent my stitches per inch, and 5 rows per inch. Okay, and I'm using a super bulky size 6 yarn. Yeah, although it might be 5, it might just be bulky. Okay, so what this means, my hip circumference was the wider, so that's 22, and it's going to represent CC. Shoulder to waist was 12 inches, and that's going to represent shoulder to waist, so STW. Arm circumference was 7. This is for a fitted sleeve. If you do not want to add a fitted sleeve, you want it a little bigger, add 4 inches to it. So add 4 to that 7. Okay, and I'll make a note here, so add 4 inches if you desire a looser sleeve. Okay? Alright. And the arm length is 12.5 inches. Alright. So here's how this works. So I've done the equation of what you're supposed to be doing. So CC, your hip measurement, divided by 2 equals your back. So 22 divided by 2 equals 11 inches. Alright. So you can take your stitches per inch, which is 3 here, and you're going to times that by 2. So however many inches shows up here, you're going to times that by 2. Alright, and that's your number to minus. So you're going to take your 3 inches here, and you're going to times that by 2, and it's going to equal 6. You're going to take your shoulder to waist measurement here, and you're going to minus this number here, and that gives you the inches to start. So 12 minus 6 equals 6. Okay, so you're going to be working with 6 inches. So inches to use for start times rows per inch equals the number of rows to start. So 6, which is how many inches you need, times 5, which will be 30 rows. Now, this is going to be a guide. If you want a long to the ankle kind of cardigan, like more like a duster length, then you will keep this number here. But if you want it to be more like a knee length, if you want a shorter cardigan, then you're going to take this number and you're going to divide by 2, and that's going to be your number of rows you're going to start with. So after you cast on, you're going to do 15 rows if you want a shorter cardigan. If you want a long one that's more like a duster length, then you'll want to stick with your 30 rows to start with after you're cast on. Alright, then you need to get your back number, which is right here, the 11, and you're going to minus number to minus, so you're going to divide the number to minus, which is the 6 here, and that's going to give you the number of rounds. So, you're going to take your back, and you're going to divide by 6, and it's going to give you 1.8 rounds, round up to 2. Alright, and then you need to know how many, you need to know about your armholes. Okay, so you can take your arm circumference, divide that by 2, and that gives you half your arm measurement. So your arm circumference was 7, but if you added the 4 inches, it'll be 11 divided by 2. And then for this, I got 3.5, so I rounded up to 4. But I also include that if you don't want it. If you want 11 divided by 2, it's 5.5, round up to 6. Okay, so I'm going to be working with 6 inches. It depends on what sleeve you want. If you want a fitted sleeve, work here. If you want a looser sleeve, work here. Okay, so you have your arm circumference divided by 2, and then that gives you your half arm measurement, which is going to be either 4 inches or 6 inches. So then you're going to take your half arm measurement, which is either 4 or 6, depending on if you added the 4 inches to it or not, to make it looser. So you're going to take that and you're going to times it by the rows per inch. So 4 times 5 equals 20. Or if you come down here and you do your 6 times 5 equals 30. So I'm going to be doing 30 rows and 20 rows. Alright, so you're going to take your number of rows and divide by 2, and that equals the number of slips to skip on the edge. So 20 divided by 2 is 10. Or 30 divided by 2 is 15 slips to skip, and I'm going to explain how that works. You have your rectangle, okay, so you have a rectangle, and you're going to be here, you're going to be skipping on this corner and this corner, and I'll explain that in more detail, but I want you to see this first, okay, and you're going to mark that area. Alright, so that's going to be important to know how many slips, but then you need to know how many rows to do. So you know you need to do 30 rows and keep marking off those slips so that you know that you're going to have 30 rows for your sleeve. 30 stitches for your sleeve. Excuse me. Okay, so this makes a fitted sleeve. If you want a looser sleeve, add 2 to 4 inches to your arm circumference total. So instead of it being 7, make it 11. 11 divided by 2 is 5.5, round up to 6. 6 times 5 is 30. So you're going to do 30 rows. 30 divided by 2 equals 15 slips to skip, so you count your 15 to not touch and add as you go. And I will post a video on how to work on skipping that area. Alright. Now, the number of pegs you will have for your sleeves is the number of rows. So 30 rows is 30 pegs. So 20, or what I intend to be, will be 30. you will need those amount of pegs for the sleeves. And I am making a cardigan for a child who's 5 who wears about a 6. So it'll probably fit anywhere from a 5-year-old to a 7-year-old. You might want to add some extra to the sleeve, but not a lot. Alright, so you're going to take your arm length and you're going to multiply that by rows per inch, and that gives you your total rows that you need to do for your sleeve. So it was 12.5 times 5, and that's 62.5 rounds. So, and I'm going to round up to 63 rows total. And then I'm going to make sure I do the garter stitch on the last 8 rows. So you'll want to minus 8 from that 63 to know. Okay. Alright, so now that we're done with that calculation, how does it all work out? You chain cast on your 10 stitches, and then you knit back and forth for 15 rows if you want the shorter cardigan, 30 rows if you want the one that goes to the ankle and be more like a duster. Then you're going to do 2 corners and work your way back and then do a corner. So if you've done a 10 stitch, you know, you start here, work your way up, corner, corner, work your way down, and then do a corner, and then work your way over. That counts as a single round. Okay, and that completes round 1. Alright, but we needed to do 2 rounds. So then you're going to do a corner, up, corner, over, corner, down, corner, over. Round 2. Okay, so you have your 2 rounds. This is where the sleeve comes in. You will count from the opposite side and place where you end on your second round, and then go to the corner. And this is where I'll have to actually show you. Okay, so what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to move away from this, and I'm going to need to show you where I'm at, and so it makes sense. Okay, so we're going to stop this. We're not going to probably come back to it. And I'm going to pull out what I've got done so far and explain that. But we're looking at 15 slips or 10 slips. I'm going to do 15. Alright. And a quick note, if you're doing the doll, if you like the doll one and you want to make a doll one, I used the 3/8 inch gauge with a worsted weight. I did 3 rounds, and I think I took out for, I think I did like 3 inches through here, so you'd have to calculate for your 3 inches through here, and I think it ends up being real close to this because you're doing it smaller. I think it ended up being like 30 stitches practically for this, so 15 chains, but this is in a smaller gauge. Okay, so it's probably gonna work the same as it is here, but yeah, and I'll explain the front. Okay, but if you're wanting to make this, I did 6 stitches, 3 rounds, worked my sleeve, and I did 2 rounds of my last stitch with a garter, and I worked my buttonholes at the halfway mark, and I'll explain all that and have the sleeve. So what I'm fixing to do is take this off and then pull this out along with what I've got so far and explain this. Alright, so now that I'm moved away from my written here, and I've turned on the light so that this is a little easier to see. Okay, so this is what I have. Alright, so I started here, as you can see. There's your cast on right there. There's your 10 stitch. Here's your 15 rows right here. So you do 15 rows back and forth. Then you do a corner, and a corner, and then you work your way back down to here, to the bottom where your cast on is. Then you're going to do a corner, and then work your cast on, and this is round 1. So this right here is round 1. Well, now you need to do a second round. So then you're going to work your way up, do a corner, work your way over, do a corner, work your way down, do a corner, and then work your way over. This is round 2. You're done with your back section, and this is where you need to start your armhole. When you go to start to do the next round, this counts as the front. So this counts as round 1 on the front. And then you do a second round. Now when you do the second round, if you want to cross over, you may need to do 3 rounds. But if you don't want that much of a crossover, you do 2 rounds, and your last round, so after you do this round with the sleeve, you have your last round should be a garter stitch round if you're doing the knits like I've done here. Okay, so what it says to do is it takes and says to go to the opposite side of where your loom is. So we're going to go over here, we're going to find this corner. So we're going to find the corner right here. Alright. And because I'm using Pipsqueak, I'm marking every single one of these chains as I go, but you should be able to see it. And I'll kind of explain that here on this one. Okay, but for now, we'll go here. So you're going to take and you're going to go to the opposite end right here. And what you're going to do, is you're going to take and you're going to count back 15 from your corner. So decide your corner. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So I counted back 15. And put my little marker in. Okay, then you're going to go to the opposite side of this. So you're going to go from here over to here, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to find the corner, and you're going to count down 15. Okay? So you're going to find your corner, which is here. You're going to count down 15. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So we're going to stick that through here. So that's where I know I need to not attach. So what this means now is you go and you start working your corner, and then you start working up. As soon as you hit this, you stop attaching. Do not attach from here to here. You're going to do 30 rows and don't attach. Then you do a corner and you start attaching again, and you're going to attach from here to here. Then you're going to do a corner and you're going to skip there to here, attaching. You're going to do your 30 rows and don't attach these. And then you finish attaching, do a corner, and work your way over. And that is round 3. So you're going to do 2 rounds for the front, 2 rounds for the back. But if you want to cross over, you may need to do 3 rounds for the front, depending. Alright, so when you go to do the last round, that's when you'll be doing your buttonholes. I will provide a link on how to do the skipping part. You're going to skip your calculations on the video on that, but you're mostly wanting to see how the technique works, where you start. You go from attaching to not attaching to creating an armhole, okay? And that's the simplicity of how to do that. Alright, now, you need to know what it looks like without all the stitch markers. Okay, you have these chains here, alright? And let's say this is my corner. What you're going to do is this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. You're going to mark those 2 as your sleeve, basing it off of the chains, okay? So those chains are slips, because they're actually slips. That's what you're doing, okay? So you're going to count that, and you're going to mark those, and that's the area of your sleeve hole that you're not going to do, okay? Which leaves you an opening. As you can see here, I have an opening for a sleeve. Alright, so what it looks like is you should have an opening here and here. So you see there were 3 rounds, so there was the 1, 2, 3. Now, of course, I had started out on this side. Okay. If you're doing it right, this is what it should look like. It's going to be turned upside down. Now, if you're wanting to add a hood, you're going to need to do this the opposite. So, like, just remember, instead of doing the buttonholes, like on the upper half where the sleeves are, you're going to be doing it over here, like, this is going to be your hood. You're going to sew these together. So what you'll do is you'll fold it and you'll sew this up if you wanted it to be a hood, okay? And that's how you can make a hood. But I'm not going into that so much. But if you want to make a hood, make it like you have been making it, but just know instead of this being the bottom, it's going to be the top, and it's going to fit more like a hoodie. Alright, it becomes a hoodie, not so much like a duster or a long cardigan. Okay, alright, so like this is your rounds. Okay, so there's like 1 round, and then there's 2 rounds, and then there's 3 rounds. Okay, so I did my 3 rounds, and then I did my armholes. Okay, when I go to do my 4th round, I did my armhole and my armhole. So what you should have finished with is like right in here. Okay, right in here. Yeah, I think so. Let's see. Right here. Then what you're going to do is you're going to do round 1 and round 2. And that's where you, when you go to do round 2, it will be on this one. But on this one, it's 3 rounds because you're only working with 6 stitches on a 3/8 inch gauge and worsted weight yarn. Okay, so and I think I did like 10 rows to do that. So that's 10 rows, and corner and corner, and that should get you started. Okay, and just know that it's like 3 inches for the sleeve, I think. Let me make sure. If you're wanting to make the doll version, yeah, 3 inches for the doll version. You can do 2 inches if you want it a little narrower. Okay, so when you go to do the garter stitch row, that's when you need to know buttonholes. Because this is a slow working thing, this should be fairly easy to figure out where your buttonholes need to be. So on my written pattern, I explain, because my starting point is here. So round and round and round and around and around. Okay. So we started here, we go around, and then we go like halfway up. I went a little bit more than halfway. But you go about, yeah, so I didn't quite go the halfway point, but you can line it up with your starting point if you want. That's kind of lined up with the starting point. And that's where you're going to do a buttonhole. You can do the buttonhole in the middle if you want, or you can do it on the edge. I did it on the edge. And I do have a video on how to do buttonholes with a garter stitch, but I think I did mine more on the center. It's up to you where you want to do your buttonhole. I did mine more on the edge. Okay. So what I do is I do a buttonhole, and then I do like 10 rows, and then do another buttonhole, and then 10 rows and another buttonhole. If you want it spaced out more, do 15 rows. Okay. But that's where your buttonholes are. Now you don't need to go all the way to the top, as you can see, because I have a fold over. So what you want to do is you want to stop your buttonhole area right with the first round of your front. So that's here. For me, I'll be stopping a little differently. Whatever your first round was for your front. If you're doing 2 or 3. So if you're doing your first round, you're going to stop doing your buttonholes right with that. Alright, so that you have your fold over of your collar. If you accidentally do a buttonhole to the top, it's not really going to show that much, because you're not going to add a buttonhole there. It'll just fold over and you'll have a little lace hole. Alright, and as you can see, I just sewed my buttons down on the other side. Alright, now I did 8 rows for the garter stitch here from my sleeves, as you can see. That changes it up. And what I will show is how to connect with the sleeve, how to connect the sleeve, so how you add your stitches in, because that's the challenging part. You've done all this skipping and everything, and you need to be able to add the pegs to these chains that you have here. Now you can make this sleeveless if you want, or you can make it with sleeves. And I'm going to show you how to add the sleeves so that they go in the right direction to do this. Okay. Now I will show how to do the sleeve part, but I'm going to give you links to go and check out how to do an opening, what you do to skip that, and I'll give you a link on how to go in and do the buttonholes. But there's a reason why I'm not going in and I'm not showing this from start to finish on how to do a 10 stitch. There are several designers out there on YouTube that do loom knitting that do the 10 stitch blanket, and it's best to go ahead and I would not suggest this project unless you did a 10 stitch blanket already. If you have not, go make a 10 stitch blanket first, because this isn't going to make any sense to you unless you've done it first. Okay, so 10 stitch blanket on another, find your favorite designer, use their 10 stitch. But the only thing I'm offering is how to turn this into a jacket, and I'm not going to go in and I'm not going to explain this in detail, how to go in and start that and do so many rows and do a corner and do a corner. You can go find out your cornering and stuff. You can use some of my other 10 stitches as a guide, how I get that smooth. I purl it instead of knit it if you want to lift it. The difference is this is a knit here and this is a purl here. Okay, that's the difference. But I'm not gonna go into that because that's a lot of extra detail, and this is a Frankie Brown pattern, the actual 10 stitch blanket, like the rectangle is a Frankie Brown pattern, and so you have the designers on YouTube that probably have gotten the permission to use her pattern. So go ahead and you find one video on that. I'll show you how to do an armhole on one, and then I'll send a video on how to do the buttonholes. Buttonholes are easy. It's a single, like you decrease over, you yarn over. Just you want to create a hole there. So the only thing I'll show is probably how to go about doing an armhole. I may show how to do an armhole, and I may show how to do a buttonhole anyway, but I'm not going to show like the whole details of where you got it. This is a guideline, okay? It gives a guideline how to make it the size you want. This is not exact science here. It's a guideline, and because it works so slow going over it, it's easy to kind of gauge where you want to be, but you always need to know where you need to start. This is where you're going to need to gauge how big it needs to be, and I showed you how to do that. Easy peasy, right? It's working out like I expected on here. I've got my back done, and your back should measure your half in your half. So remember I said it was what, 11? So if I go across here and I measure that, and that's 11. See, 11. So it's working. It's 11. Now from your shoulder to back was 12. It may not be exactly 12. Okay. Because I wanted it shorter, I only did the 15 rows, and so it came out to 8.5. Now, if you're doing the back like I suggest with the rows and everything, it should have been 12. But because I don't want it as long, it ended up being 9. That's why you just shorten it. As I said, it's a guideline to be able to make it, okay? But what you need to know is that first square is the big thing, okay? And how to open up your armholes, which I explained how to do that, okay? So you can keep watching this video, but what you want to do is you want to get yourself started, do however many rounds. I'll kind of give you a guide on how to go about doing the armholes. I'll also provide a link in my PDF on how to go do an armhole. And then I'll show how to do a sleeve, the sleeve where you connect the sleeve, because that's going to be important. which side you're on, how does it connect. I'll be providing a picture so that you have a good idea of what it should look like when you attach the loom, and you can kind of see whether you have it right or not. Okay. Alright, so pause the video, get your rounds done, get your sleeve area started, or get up to a point where you know where your sleeve area is. So I'm going to be working my way to here and show you how to do a sleeve. Alright, and then we'll go from there. So the only thing I'm really going to show is the stuff that's different from an actual 10 stitch, so that you kind of get a general idea. But I'm not going to show how to do a 10 stitch. You got to go hunt down that video yourself. There's plenty of people out there that know how to do it. I'll provide several links from different people who do it in the link below, and we'll go from there. Alright, so get yourself started. Okay, so as you can see, I had done this corner here and I'd worked my way down. Alright, and so I have reached my marker for the armhole. Okay, so now here's where you want to keep up. Okay, so get me a hook over here. Alright, so you skip that first peg as always and put a stitch marker there, and you're going to knit your way over. Okay, then you're going to knit that and then put a stitch marker in. That stitch right there that you just made. Because at this point you're not connecting anymore. And then you're going to work your way over. This is where you work 30 rows, which should give you 15 chains on the end. Okay, so you can either use a row counter or you can just count your stitch markers until you reach 15. Okay, so a stitch marker in there because I'm working with this stuff that you can't see literally, your chains. So all you do is you keep going back and forth. And then you toss that one over. And then you put a stitch marker. See, put stitch marker in the end one. This will help you when you go to do the sleeves to put on the stitches you need to do the sleeves. So it makes it a lot easier to do it this way. Alright, so now normally I wouldn't be doing stitch markers on this side, just the inside over here, just this side, but because I can't see what I'm doing, you can't see the chains on the end, you have to feel for them, and I don't feel like feeling for them every time I need to pull one up, and I don't want to risk missing one, so I just put a stitch marker there. So put your stitch marker on the ends, and you do this for 30 rows, back and forth, okay, until you have 15 stitch markers from where you started. or your row counter says 30 rows. Alright, so put that on the end. Alright, so you keep going back and forth, and you can count how many you've done because you have 1 and 2. See? So you keep going until you have 15 stitch markers. Alright. And then once you get your 15 stitch markers, then you do a corner. So once you finish this, then you do a corner like this here. So you do a corner. Then you start attaching again, and then you keep attaching, keep attaching, keep attaching, keep attaching, do a corner, doom, doom, and then you quit attaching for 30 rows until you get down to here. Then you start reattaching again, do, corner, and then there is your third round. Then your fourth round should be going in and doing your garter stitch, and that's your buttonhole. And I'll explain how to do that. So right now, I'll give you an overview of what we're doing. Okay, so I started here. I did a corner, worked my way, did a corner. Okay. Then I started to work my way down. I hit my stitch marker. Then I don't connect for 30 rows, or 15 stitch markers should be able to be counted. And then I do a corner, just like I did here. I do a corner, I do a corner. Then I start attaching again all through here. And then I do another corner, like I did in here, and do a corner. And then you don't attach, just like you did here. Don't attach it all the way until you get to here. Then you attach, do a corner, and there. So there you go. So if you're not attaching right now, then you'll do a corner, finish, corner, don't attach through here, and then attach down through here, corner, and then straight over. And that should give you round round 3. Then you should be able to start on round 4. Okay, so that's your next goal, is round 4, and that's when you do a garter stitch, and that's when you'll start working in your buttonholes, and I'll show you how to do a buttonhole. It's really easy. So I could show you on here real quick, but it's you start where your holes. Okay, so for instance, these are your holes. When you go to start the next round, you're going to start doing like buttonholes on this side. Okay, not up here, but on this side. So you start right here and go up from there, and you can finish right about there too. Okay, so as I said, this pattern's a guideline, not exact. So, but the most exact thing you can do is your armholes. Your buttonholes, if you feel like doing the whole side, it give it something, but it's about every 10 to 15 rows that you add a buttonhole. Alright, so that's how you start to do your armholes. So keep going, and I'll show you how to do some buttonholes when I get there. Okay, so the next thing is to gauge where you want to do your buttonholes, and put them in. Okay, so here's how this works. I've worked my way around. Alrighty. So that's kind of what I have. I'm on my last round, so I've already started doing my garter stitch. Now, my first buttonhole is right here. So what you want to do is you want to follow your bind on, And you're going to go all the way around and find your first line for your first round. You're going to follow that all the way over, and I'm a little higher, but that's okay. This is a kind of guesswork rather than exact science. So there's your buttonhole. What I suggest doing, as you can see here, is I've got a contrasting marker where I want to do a buttonhole, and I'm fixing to explain that. Now, just to make sure I had the right process of what I wanted, there's a second buttonhole. And buttonholes are not as hard as you think. Okay? Now, what I do is I put in a contrasting marker, and I'll explain this, and to the chain. Okay? And this counts as, when you decide where you want to do it, put the contrasting marker in. Then, what you want to do is you either want to count 5 to, I think, 7 or 8. It depends on what you want, how much distance you want. Calculate it. So then we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I counted 7. I place a marker for my next buttonhole on the next chain. So then I count from here, I count this and I count 7. And then on the next slip, I add a chain. Alright, so how you do a buttonhole. That last chain always wants to come undone. You gotta be careful when you're running these things around. Alright, let me get that. Okay, now typically what I like to do is I start my way back. This is how I know when it's time to do a buttonhole. When I'm starting my way back, I like to put my next stitch marker on. That tells me it's time to do a buttonhole. So what you want to do is you want to knit and stop just before this last one here. Okay, so I'm going to knit my way over, and I'm going to stop. You can do this buttonhole anywhere you want. Buttonholes are easy. Okay, so if you want to make really big buttonholes, that it can get a little difficult. So you want to pick up this stitch, and you just want to move it over to the next peg. Okay. Then your yarn over is you lay the working yarn over that empty peg, and then you're going to knit both these stitches together. You're going to slip that first stitch, and then you're going to purl that yarn over. And because you're purling back, that should be easy to remember when working on your buttonholes. Then at this point, you just add the chains back on and keep going until you reach your next marker. Okay, when you reach your next marker, you know to decrease. Alright, so I'm purling those two together. And again, I like to put my next chain on. Alright, the good thing is when you start adding in your last round, which is where I'm at, you don't have to worry about so much on keeping up with your chains anymore. So I'm getting to recapture all my stitch markers because I couldn't see them on my chains on this. So, but as you can see, here's my stitch markers for my sleeve on both of them. And so far my measurement is going to add up. It's going to be 22 inches, just as intended. Okay, so 22 inches when I'm finished. So at this point I'm going to finish all the way around. And the good thing is when you start your buttonholes on your very first last round, on your first line on your last round, which I would have finished my third round here, ready to start my fourth round, go ahead and do your buttonholes. That way when you do the rest of it, you don't have to worry about it, okay? So these are your buttonholes. This is what that looks like. You can get a pretty decent sized button in there. Probably about an inch button you can fit in there. Okay? And if you want to see Oh my god, it's close by. That's a pretty big button. Because of the stretch, that can go through that hole easily. See? So, those provide a pretty large button you can put on here. Okay? So, that shows you how to do the buttonholes. Go ahead and finish the basis of this, and then what comes next is showing you how to add the sleeves. Okay? So go ahead and finish your last round. I'll show you how to add the sleeves. They're pretty easy once you get the idea. You may have one or two extra chains to add. That's okay. It's typically good to add them at the tops and bottoms where their gap can develop. Alright, but otherwise that's how you do a buttonhole. Okay. So here we are. We have finished our round. All the way around. We're ready to add our sleeves. Now, what you want to do is you want to have the right side facing up. And on this one, it may be hard to tell, but that's going to be the stockinette with the nice chain look to it. And the reason why I know that that's the right side is there's my tail that I started with, which is on the wrong side. If you want it the other way, you are more than welcome to do it the other way. Okay. Now, I went ahead and have my 30 pegs put together on my flexi loom. And here is what you want to do. So, what you want to do is basically you want to start putting these stitch markers on to the pegs. Okay. And I wouldn't take them off until you got them all on. Alright. So. The great thing about having the stitch markers already in here is you can just put them on. Now you should have 30 stitches you're putting on from your little markers. About 30 chains. If you have a little more, put them at the top and the bottom. Okay? Just a suggestion if you have more. But I would suggest sticking with what your calculation is. Okay? Okay. So go along and put the chains on there. And it may seem tight at first when you're knitting it, but the further you get along, the better. Okay. So you just go one thing after another and you put them on here. Okay. Okay. Go ahead and start kind of putting the other side on. I will say this is not the easiest yarn to do this kind of thing with unless you've got an absolute ton of stitch markers. In which I do. I have an obscene amount of stitch markers, so it's not as difficult. As I said, it will seem tight at first, but what you're trying to do is you're only putting on like 1/2 of the chain. Okay. Oh, there's one. I about missed it. You may know that you missed one. Okay. There's that one. And that one seems like it's still connected to the other one. So I don't think that's a fresh one. Alright, now it says here I'm off by 2, but I've got space through here. And you can fill in that space with those kind of weird areas at the beginning and end that aren't exactly chains, but they can cause openings. And so I just kind of fill those in like that. And as you can see, that worked. I think there's one over here that I wanted to do that with. Fill it in. Okay. Well, looky there. See? You now have your sleeve attachment here. And at this rate, this is where you want to start doing all your rows, okay, that you had intended to do. So let me look at my note and I'll tell you how many rows you need to do. So you are doing sleeves come in, let's see, sleeves are 55 rows of knit and then 8 rows of garter. So 55 rows of knit and 8 rows of garter. And if you are using this yarn, make sure you have a row counter, because you ain't gonna see the row. I can tell you that much. You are not gonna see the row. So make sure you have a row counter. I know I'm gonna be using mine. Alright. So, and garter stitch is purl a row, knit a row, purl in a row, knit a row, if you're wondering what a garter stitch is. Okay. So you're going to do 55 rows knitting round and round and round. And you're going to do the same thing for the other side. Okay. And then all you got to do is sew the buttons on. Okay. And that's pretty easy. Now I'm going to offer a suggestion. Let's say, for instance, you're running closer than you like, or you want it just slightly bigger in the front or something like that. What you can do is, if you have the yarn, you can just go in and you can just do a single strip down the front, or you can go in and do a whole nother round if you want. Okay. I think my girl has grown since then, because it measures out like it's supposed to. There's a reason why you don't see many sweater projects. It's impossible to work on a surface with it. Okay, so I think she's grown some, and so I think I may need to do a strip down the front, but the measurements acted up right, just right. Measured it all out and it worked out right. So I don't know. The only thing is she's grown. So if you have that situation with this little jacket, you got a kid and you measured it and you worked it up and suddenly they've grown, guess what? It's easy to add to the round of it. You do better to make the sleeves a little longer rather than shorter, and you can still get it to fit. That is the beauty of this, is you can add to it and it works. Okay, so those are options if you get there and because this is so close to my, like it measures, but I have a feeling she's grown around some, because you know it's winter, you have fun, but not by much. So I'm probably going to do a strip down the front, and I have the yarn for it. So that's if you have to. But otherwise, you take all these off, and then you can just start knitting. Okay, easy peasy stuff. All right. Now, when you think about that and how easy it is to open the hole, make sure you're putting stitch markers in so you have the hole to guide through. This is really not difficult to do. Okay. So, alright. Now, there you have it. Now, my suggestion is to start at the top of the bottom, and you know where the top of the bottom is. Now, this is going to be my starting point here personally, and I'm going to work my way around there because I have two colors the same here, and that's where my split is between the front and the half. Okay, that's my suggestion. Okay, now my other suggestion is, now remember, this is the right side. I put it pull through on the right side and put it on, because when you go to knit it, it's coming through, and if you remember, the right side faces you out here. Okay, and that's what you're going to want, because if you go in and you do it on the wrong side, you're going to have the stockinette stitch really mess with you. So my suggestion is, when you're doing this, to place it right side up, and then get your loom and put it over the hole, and then pull it up through the hole and start that way, and that way you make sure that it's on the right side. Now, my suggestion, if your measurements were closer to exact, which mine were exactly 22, and I put it on her, and the only thing I noticed was it was a little small through here. So what I'm going to do is add a strip through here. So I'm going to take my chains, and I'm going to do another garter stitch, and that should do it, because the length is good and everything. So, but if you come to the front and you find that the front needs more, just do a whole nother round. Just do a whole nother round. So, but for me, I'm just going to do a strip, because she seems to have gotten big, but my kids can't seem to stop growing at this point. So that's the downside of when you're constantly making stuff for kids and things take a little longer. So, but that's pretty much it. You're going to do 55 rows, garter stitch, bind off, simple stuff, and then you have it. That's how you make a 10 stitch cardigan. You're going to sew the buttons on through here, and I'm going to be sewing mine on the edge, or you can sew them on the edge, or you can sew them in the middle, depends on how your sizing's running. But you just, if you're wanting to figure out how to do the buttonholes, I can show you that real quick. So what you do is you're going to fold it over like this. So you're going to fold it over, you're going to take it and you'll fold it over, and then fold it over, and then you're going to probably want to send some pins through. And then what you want to do is you want to go in and find your buttonhole. So you find your first buttonhole, and my suggestion is, when you find your first buttonhole, you go ahead and you start sewing it from there. Then you find your next buttonhole and you start sewing it from there. So, next buttonhole, next buttonhole, next buttonhole. Okay. See, line it up where you want it, and it might be easier for you to go in with a safety pin and pull some up through, and that way it keeps you locked in. Alright, but you sew your buttons on, and then this will fold down as collar. Okay, so I'm going to call that done on this video. That's all you needed to know is how to add the stitches back. It's easy peasy from here. You work it just like you do a hat at this point. You just go round and round and round, 55 rows, and 8 rows of garter, and you do it on both sides. And then you sew your buttons on. I'm not going to do a super detailed explanation because I would suggest doing a 10-stitch blanket before tackling a project like this so that you already know and have a feel for it. And then once you have a feel for it, this is easy. All you need to know is how to open an armhole, how to calculate for it, how to calculate for the body, and you got it. Alright, so that's how you go in and go about making the 10-stitch cardigan, okay? So go ahead and finish up your project. And if you're really proud of your project, you are more than welcome to tag the Loom Muse on Facebook, or you can share it with me through my email, or you can share it with me on Instagram, or you can share it to me on any private messenger or anything like that. Okay, so go ahead and finish your project, and that's how you make a 10-stitch cardigan.